So in terms of those opportunities, sure. I mean, there's opportunities to do that. I think that it would have to be certain. There would probably be certain areas of town where that would make more sense, and those would have to be examined. But yeah, I mean, service hours is a very, it seems easy, but it's expensive, obviously, because of the operating cost. And so that's something that is low-hanging fruit. Just run the buses more often, and later.
Thank you. Getting into a vehicle and driving in Tulsa is way too convenient. What will convince citizens to use transit?
Well, I don't know that we're really out to necessarily convince people to use transit. I think the goal is to provide a long-term range of options. So, but I think one of the things that is sort of a striking figure is if you think about today, you can buy a transit pass for a current transit system, $480 for the entire year. You can ride it every day, as much as you want, less than $500. Most of us spend more than that on our vehicles in just 1 month, in terms of the fuel and the insurance and everything that goes with that. So I think that in terms of the savings that can be rendered from that, there's lots of people in cities that have good transit service that will go from having a 2-car household to having a 1-car household. And that enables them to retain the flexibility of having a vehicle, but for that old car that you just drive back and forth to work, and that's all you ever do, that car can be eliminated from your family budget. And so that enables you to have more flexibility with your income. We spend about a quarter of our income on average, if you look across the nation, on transportation. But areas that are transit rich, in other words, areas that have lots of transit options, spend considerably less than that. So, I mean, I think that's an obvious one. I think as congestion increases over time, we have corridors like the Broken Arrow Expressway corridor where you have very limited right-of-way, and expanding that highway any further than 6 lanes is very difficult, if not impossible, because of the vast expense of that. So as that corridor, I mean, we're connecting the state's second largest city, the state's 4th largest city, with Broken Arrow and Tulsa, and continuing to provide for that volume of traffic over the next 30 years will mean increased congestion. So congestion is one thing that definitely causes people to switch, as well as the economic aspects of it as well.
Doug, I've got one last one.
Well, I'd like to hear one of the Texas guys, Dallas. Texas is about as car-oriented as you can get. So what convinced people in Dallas to embrace mass transit there?
Mike and I are both from our Dallas office, and I've actually been working with Dallas Area Rapid Transit since its inception in the mid-'80s. And I think every city that goes through planning and building a system goes through the same thing. There are a lot of people that say you can never get people out of their cars, especially in Texas. But DART is under tremendous pressure now to expand further out into the suburbs, even though they don't have the financial capacity to do it, because there's a huge demand. And it's growing, like you said, from the choice riders, not necessarily from those that are transit dependent, but the people that have a choice that want to ride transit. Just as one example, one of the most successful lines today has been the Red Line, which goes north to Plano, northern suburb. And it's about, on a good day, a 45-minute commute. On a bad day, it can be an hour-and-a-half commute. The difference is transit will always be 45 minutes every day from North Plano to downtown Dallas. And people have made that choice because instead of spending 45 minutes to an hour-and-a-half in their car, they can be on the train, start working when they get on the train in the morning on their laptop, or read, or just relax, or sleep. And that's a big difference than having to drive in every day. And they may not do it every day. Maybe they only do it on days when it's raining, or they don't have to have their car during the day or something like that. It's those choice riders that really start to make a difference.
Another factor that we watch is the impact of the changing price of fuel. A few years ago, when gas really shot up, transit ridership around the country on average went up by 25%. The reason that corporations are concerned about do communities provide a range of choices for people to travel is because they know in the future that's going to be more important to have a range of choices. This last weekend, We saw gas over $3 a gallon again in a lot of places. I don't know if that happened here in Tulsa, but it's coming, and that'll have a big impact. It's amazing how that alone dictates how a lot of people view that automobile.
I have a question. Planet Tulsa had talked about taking 2 of the routes here, the 21st Street route and the Peoria route, and beefing those routes up to show what a public transportation system could do, making the Saturday service better, the night service better, and putting a Sunday service in. Have you talked about including that in this?
Yes, that's referred to as the big T in the Planet Tulsa Vision Transit Plan, and the answer is yes. That obviously with doing that, I mean that isn't anywhere. I mean basically that's just adding buses to a route, and again if the funding is there to do it, it's easy to do. Just add the frequency to where it's every 10 minutes, and you've got it down. So in terms of that, that may be one of those things that in the short term that is definitely a viable thing. And I think obviously the route that goes up and down Peoria is Tulsa Transit's highest ridership route. It accounts for about 15% of their entire system's ridership. So in terms of looking at the whole system, it seems like a great opportunity to do that. The only thing that's really holding that agency back is just the amount of funding that's necessary to provide those service hours on that route. So that one and the 21st Street route I think would be great pilot projects. And of course our plan is looking regionally in scope, but it doesn't mean that it can't include things that just operate within the city of Tulsa too.
That was my last question, actually, Big T. So, we have one more.
Well, I think I might have a funding idea for you guys. What if you stop fixing all the roads in Tulsa and now force drivers to use public transit, use that money to fund the public transit system? Also, I had a question, not to be a pessimist, but I was curious if you guys are looking at maybe cities or regions that have failed to in this, whether they've tried to do something and it didn't work, or they have not tried to do anything at all.
Yeah, there's been some interesting stories out there. If you ever go to Miami, go try to ride the heavy rail system in Miami. It's terribly designed. It wasn't really designed to serve the transit needs, and it was largely because politics got in the way of technical analysis. So, I mean, that's an example of a city that we can learn from in terms of a system that didn't work out quite like they hoped it would. There's other cities that have had things that they've had to tweak on a minor level. Austin recently opened a commuter line, and the commuter line is a decent alignment, but they didn't orient their bus system to serve those stations within that corridor very well. So in other words, if you lived a mile away from the commuter line, you didn't want to get in your car and drive over to the station, the bus didn't necessarily go to the station that you needed to go to. And so they've had to rethink that a little bit, and that's why system planning is so important, because it's not just the one line, it's everything and how it all fits together. Just like our highway system and the way we orient our highways has to integrate with our arterial road network, because if those don't integrate well together, then the highway doesn't work like it's supposed to, or the arterial network doesn't work the way it's supposed to. So in the same way, the conventional bus system has to be oriented around that corridor properly, and that's why the system plan is really the high-level view that makes sure that all that fits together.
I'll just tag on to what you started there. Another reason that Austin is a good lesson learned is that they also went the route of trying to do a low-cost system using an existing rail corridor that didn't necessarily go where people wanted to go. So their result of that has been low ridership. They're trying to find ways to do that. Changing that by encouraging transit-oriented development around some of the stations, by adding additional trains, even though there are a lot of people on them. So that's something they're fighting, and it's something we need to look at as an example of how not to do it, really. And they've been fighting battles down there for years to get that system to work. Also, like Miami is a case of having a system that was just too expensive. The existing system that was done was a heavy rail system, much like New York or Washington, D.C., all elevated. It was called a third rail system, meaning the power is in the tracks, meaning you have to have grade separation. You can't run the thing on the street like light rail can, and that's the cost effectiveness of light rail, is that you can run at grade across streets and so forth. Because we were actually looking at expanding the Miami system, there was no way that the federal government was going to fund expanding it just because the cost per rider was too high. So now Miami is looking at not abandoning what they have, but future modes being light rail or streetcar or other modes that are cost effective and are fundable.
One more question. Let Casey handle that.
I just came back from Portland, Oregon, where you have free fares. And my question is, have there ever been studies, you say that the fare box represents roughly 10 to 20% of your working capital revenue. What if you got rid of bus fares? Would the benefit of more ridership possibly outweigh the cost that you're losing? In other words, having more riders be economically more beneficial than the 10 to 20% you're losing? Have such studies ever been done?
Yeah, a number of systems have studied that idea of a free fare zone. Portland pioneered it with their free fare box, where when you come into the center city within a certain zone, up until this last year, you didn't pay a fare within that zone as long as you boarded and alighted within the zone. They did that because they have a agreement regionally that the outlying transit routes help pay in to support the center city system for a portion of the fares that they collect of people who are riding in order to get downtown. They still have the free fare zone on their rail, but they took it off the bus system this last year, I think. It's a big debate of that, it definitely stimulates ridership, and they think it was very worthwhile. I know a number of other communities that are intrigued with that idea and considering it, a lot of support for it. I think it's a matter of just doing some economic analysis once you have a system up and running to see that does it really pay off in terms of getting more ridership by charging less.
Get one more question over here.
Assuming that there is overwhelming public buy-in, when can we look forward to the implementation of the first phase of this plan?
Well, we're planning to have the system plan in place by sometime this summer. So, of course, that's just the first step. The next step is, as I showed you on the slide earlier, the alternatives analysis process, which looks at a specific corridor. That process could take about a year to look at the corridor in detail, determine what the alignment would be, what the financial plan would be, and work out all of the details of gaining the right-of-way, especially if it were in a rail corridor that's existing. All of those corridors are privately owned by the freight operators, so there's some challenges that would have to be overcome there. I think most cities that are in the situation that we are in today, to be able to see a high capacity mode, and of course, like I said earlier, we're looking at some short-term bus improvement as well, and those things can happen in the next 3 to 5 years. But I think we're looking at probably a 7 to 10 year time frame, especially if federal funding is a way that we think we will be able to go. Cities like Oklahoma City will probably move faster